So when you look through your section in the Catechism about mortal and venial sin in 1855, mortal sin destroys charity in the heart of man by a grave violation of God's law. It turns man away from God, who is his ultimate end and his beatitude, by preferring an inferior good to him. And venial sin allows charity to subsist, even though it offends and wounds it. Okay? Mortal sin, by attacking the vital principle within us, that is charity, necessitates a new initiative of God's mercy and conversion of heart, which is normally accomplished within the setting of the sacrament of reconciliation. One thing that I wanted to mention to you is kind of this idea that all of us have what's called passion. And we can have passion that's ordered or disordered. If it's ordered, that means that that passion would be helpful in enabling you to be the saint that you're called to be. If it's disordered, then it can be something that hinders you from being the saint that you're called to be. The way that you respond to passion, whether it's ordered or disordered, is through what's called licit or illicit. So if let's say you're walking along and you see someone who's attractive and you have, a thought that's like, wow, that's a beautiful person. Well, that's not wrong. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with recognizing somebody's a beautiful person. But if you start to meditate and you start to have thoughts that are disordered about that person, like maybe you want to sleep with that person and they're not your spouse, then that could be a disordered passion, right? A thought, and you're entertaining it and you're starting to really cross some lines. So then what you have to recognize is that you can respond to that in a way that's licit or illicit. So I have that thought and I say, Lord, I know that you don't want me to think about that person in that way, so forgive me, change my heart, help me to see them as your creature, your child, your love, that kind of thing. Or you can respond illicitly and you can start to act upon that thought and that sin. When we talk about mortal sin, again, you have as this kind of foundational background the Ten Commandments, but also we recognize that there are 7 deadly sins. And what I want to do is just kind of draw your attention to something that's kind of fascinating, and I think this comes from Peter Kreeft's Back to Virtue, where he looks at the 7 deadly sins and he compares it with a virtue. He counters that sin with a virtue. So this is just one of many different ways that people do this, and I kind of like the idea. So pride, seen as unrestrained appreciation of our worth, is countered with humility, right? Greed and immediate desire for earthly goods, or an imminent desire, an unhealthy desire for earthly goods, is countered with liberality, right? You're not holding on to seizing these earthly goods, rather you're willing to be generous and share. Lust, this desire for impure pleasure and a moderate desire for impurity, that's countered with chastity. And remember, even if you're a person who's married, you still have to be a person of chastity. Chastity isn't saying that you have no desires and no interest. Chastity is just a willingness to say no to what you're not given to. So for example, I'm married. I'm saying I give myself entirely to you. So I'm not free to give myself entirely to someone else. Like, Linda, I am married to you. I give myself entirely to you. My body is yours. Therefore, I'm not free to give it to someone else. And so if you're not married, chastity works like, I have given my body to Christ and I won't give it to another until you give me that person to give it to. So we implement and we hold to chastity to help counter lust. Anger, inordinate desire for revenge. It's a hostility. It's countered with meekness. Gluttony, unrestrained use of food and drink, and that's countered with temperance, which of course is a cardinal virtue. Envy, sorrow over another's good fortune, and actually envy is even a little bit more, there's a willingness and a desire for another's even undoing. Out of envy, and that would be countered with brotherly love. So when you have that affection for someone, it kind of robs you of the opportunity to be envious of that person. Sloth, a laxity in keeping the faith and the practice of virtue, that would be countered with diligence. And some of the effects of original sin: that human nature is corrupted, the understanding is darkened, and the will is weakened. and there's a strong inclination to do evil. And that inclination to do the evil as a result of original sin is what's called concupiscence, right? And it doesn't take a lot. You can just fan into fire this you know, kind of this desire and this urge to do the things that you know you shouldn't do. Earlier, we mentioned briefly the preternatural gifts, and we talked about mortality, but there's a couple others that are important to remember. That it's probable that Adam and Eve had an infusion of knowledge, that Adam was able to name all the animals and remember that. There was an integrity, a unity between the will and the emotions, right? Immortality for the purpose of choosing to say yes in obedience to God. So post-fall, right, we have this original sin, and we lost immortality, and we lost the infusion of knowledge, and we lost that integrity. We have this concupiscence, and now with sin, we're going to have to constantly submit ourselves to God, to resist the devil, and know that he'll flee from us, knowing that we have the world and the flesh and the devil as temptations. The more that we fill ourselves with grace, the more we can battle against these sinful thoughts and inclinations. The last example I want to give you is kind of a weird example, but here's like a little, I don't know, it's like a vitamin water drink. Normally I use a water bottle, but I wanted to show you this. It's kind of the image here. I'll back up a little bit, but sin is kind of like this scenario here. So you're born and you're filled with grace at baptism, right? You're filled with grace at baptism. So this is full of its water, and it's sealed, okay? So if I pop the seal, then the graces, if you will, the water can get out. Now life happens, right? You're baptized, life happens, and not anything horrible. It's just graces begin to kind of flow out. It might be a little venial sin here and a venial sin there. Maybe I'm upset with my brother or sister and I say something I shouldn't, or I'm frustrated because, you know, somebody's popular and I'm not, whatever it is. Little graces go, and we find that we're getting a little bit emptier. It's not a huge deal. We pray, maybe it fills up a little bit. Maybe we go to church and it's filled up because we have the source and summit of our faith in the Eucharist. But life happens, little of this, little of that, and the graces fall out, okay, if you will. Venial sin can lead to more venial sin, can lead to ultimately some deadly sins. So what happens is we get empty, we feel empty a little bit, and somebody comes along and says, you know, if you want to be full, if you want to be happy, if you want to be vibrant, do this. And so some of it's not so bad, you know, hang out, you know, maybe say this word, watch this movie, you know. It's not the end of the world, but, you know, it's a little bit of a compromise here and there on what you know to be true and good and beautiful. But then all of a sudden somebody says, you know, you're really empty. What you need to do is you need to add, you know, this. And so sometimes what I'll have is I'll have like some coffee, just like venial sin. It's still mostly water, but I pour it in and it changes the color from white to more of a brown. And it looks a little nasty, but it's still drinkable. If I added, you know, some soda, and if I added some milk, and then it gets a little weird. It's even more of a disgusting consistency, but it's still drinkable. It's not poisonous. That's venial sin. But then if I say, well, look, I'm going to pour in whatever, some Clorox. So now we're turning the corner, and that's mortal sin. And the change on the color consistency will probably still be that kind of ugly venial color, if you will, but certain poisons and toxins will change the color drastically. No matter what, once poison enters and I drink of it, I will start to die. And that's a great picture of mortal sin. So what has to happen is not fill to the top and let some of it flow over. We need to have the whole thing dumped out and then refilled up with grace. So when we go to the sacrament of reconciliation, which we'll talk about, that is an important thing that happens there. All the junk is poured out and all the grace is put back in, and we leave ready to roll and enabled to do great things. And when we poison our hearts, if you will, with the sinfulness of this world, the flesh, its inclinations to things that aren't healthy, or listen to the lies of the devil, when we entertain these things of grave matter, then that spiritual grace, that spiritual life in us dies. And so it's no wonder some of us struggle so much, because you can't be victorious if you've been poisoned. So avail yourself of the sacraments, which of course we want to understand in order to be the saints that we're called to be.